Okay, with what we have on the ground now, we heard what the Emir of Kano said is, as an economist, he's been looking at the fact that this thing cannot work, and it's been long coming, that the issue, the looming disaster in the Nigerian economy didn't happen just yesterday. But as we have it now, it is no gainsaying that we have an over-bloated government. Even President Muhammadu Buhari said it, that about 90% of the Nigerian budget goes into recurrent expenditure, which of course we see a change in the 2016 budget. But if we are looking at a political reform, what would you suggest as a lawmaker to your colleagues in this regard?
Anyway, like I said, that what I think my colleagues should do is to make sure that we take our oversight functions and responsibility very seriously, and make sure that government funds are being protected from looters. And corruption is actually the major problem we're facing as a country. If we must carry out our oversight functions and make sure there's compliance to economic regulations, then we will begin to have a head. We will never get it right if the legislature will carry out our oversight functions with the fear of God and holistically. Because if we do that, then we'll be able to save funds. But all this is as a result of the ineptitude of the immediate past government. When there was a rainy, when the crude oil price was fantastic, we did not save enough. Instead, the economy was looted. So what we need to do as a government, as a people now, is to make sure that the sincerity of purpose and a commitment in leadership, a sacrifice in spending. And again, Nigerians must know that it is not good times for us, and cut down drastically. And I do support that whatever it takes, public officers must be responsible enough to make sure that they reasonably now approach things from a very reasonable perspective.
All right, just a moment. Hang in there, Senator Melai. We'll come back to you. Let's go to Abuja, where Mr. Nwanko is there. Mr. Nwanko, let me quickly just take you through some of the recommendations of the National Conference of 2014 as presented to former President Goodluck Jonathan. One of it was that they recommended a modified presidential system, which is going to be slightly different from what we're seeing at the moment. They also says that recommended that the president should not select more than 18 ministers like we have now, 36 ministers statutorily, because of what the Constitution says. Do you think, as a matter of urgency, that this government and Nigeria should immediately move into considering some of these recommendations?
Well, I think there's a lot of recommendations that have been on the table that needs to be implemented urgently. Certainly, the Constitution describes having enough ministers to satisfy the 36 states that exist. I think that you need to tinker with this in the Constitution so that you do not have that much number of ministers. Ministerial appointments based perhaps on geopolitical zones rather than on representing the states, I think would make more sense. But perhaps there's even more radical suggestions. Certainly looking at the National Assembly, there are questions whether you should have two arms of the National Assembly. Should you really not have just one arm of the National Assembly? And if you're talking as well about the number of ministers, should the National Assembly have 65 committees in the Senate and 95 or 97 as you have in the House? All of these are things that cost a lot of money to run. So I think that looking at the way government is structured, you need to reduce the number of positions that exist, which public funds go to service. I think that a country can never develop if you spend as much as 72% of your revenues as recurrent expenditure running government. Where do you then find money to carry out development? I think also that this country needs to move forward in terms of where we are headed. I think that there's so much that is looking back in terms of blaming the past government. Certainly the past government was a disaster, and a lot of us have been very angry about the past government, but we think that this new government is taking too much time to get started. The country is almost at a standstill, and this country needs to begin to go forward in terms of making sure that this government begins to spend money, budget is passed, and government begins to run. These are part of the crises and challenges that Nigerians face at this time. And I think that almost a year since Nigerians saw a new government in place, we need to see government functioning. And that's the challenge we have today, that it is not doing so.
Just in line with what you were talking about, one of the recommendations also was that a bicameral legislature, just as we have now, should be dropped. But all elected members of the legislative arms of all the tiers of government should serve on part-time basis. That's one of the recommendations of the 2014 National Conference. And just a question here from one of our viewers who is tweeting. Peter Heavens says, the system is not a problem, but the politicians who sees politics as full-time business. The Constitution should be reviewed. Would you suggest that at the moment that we scrap the full-time business idea that we have in our politics right now, and we go into a part-time engagement of politicians in government?
No, I do not think so, because I know very closely how the legislature functions. I know that members of the National Assembly are not just sitting 3 days in a week and doing nothing in the other 2 days of the week. No, they are very busy people. The committees are there, they are functioning. What we do need to do is to streamline the system so that you can get the best out of it. Again, I would say that you really perhaps need a unicameral legislature so that you have just one chamber of a National Assembly with less members than you have today, less committees, and of course greater delivery on expectation.
All right, Mr. Nwankwo, you made mention of the fact that Nigeria needs to move forward and stop looking backward, but move forward. Would you say the political arena is the most troubled sector of our national life, or perhaps there are some other worms eating into our life nationally as a country?
I think there's too much politics. I think for a lot of people, elections haven't happened. People expect government to begin to function. We must really express some concern that it took this government more than 5 months to get its ministers in place. And this is March, there's no budget in place. I think there's too much politics, and what Nigerians expect is less politics and more governance. I think that given the crisis that we face with poor infrastructure, as we speak, most Nigerian homes do not have electricity, offices do not have, there's no petrol supply. The crisis is just really not what people expect. And I think that the politics needs to reduce, and government needs to become much more focused on delivering on citizens' demands. And as we speak, I think that this government needs to take seriously that citizens are getting somewhat disenchanted, actually very disenchanted, and get into the serious business of governance.
Okay, what then is the way forward, since there's so much politicking and less of actual governance?
I think that this government needs to see itself running on all streams. You have ministers, we're not hearing a lot from the ministers, too much quietness. There's no sense from citizens on what the policy direction of the different ministries and different sectors of the economy is looking like. I think that the government can run on all cylinders, which means that while you have specific ministries or specific agencies of government doing one business, you have others also doing other businesses, and all of this can aggregate into delivering on citizens' expectations. As it is, as we speak now, we don't get the sense that every sector of this government is really running on full steam, and I think that's a major worry. This government needs to begin to run on all cylinders and to deliver.
All right, we take a moment on the program, and when we return, a former presidential candidate joins us as we talk more on the cost of governance in Nigeria and the way forward. Join us again.